History books tell you the Nazis fell. They don't always tell you what happened to the men who helped them, the collaborators who sold out their countries, the ones who wore swastikas on their sleeves while their neighbors starved. When the guns finally stopped, when the camps opened, when the bodies were counted, 7 names rose to the top of the revenge list. These weren't random traitors. These were the men who turned betrayal into theater. Men who thought they'd ride the Third Reich to glory and instead rode wooden chairs to firing squads while cameras rolled and crowds gathered. Public executions, state-sanctioned spectacles, names shouted from scaffolds at dawn. This is what happens when collaboration becomes so toxic that a bullet isn't enough. They needed the world to watch. Near Rome, June 5th, 1945. 26-year-old Pietro Koch sits in a chair, hands tied behind his back, facing away from 17 public security guards standing 15 paces back. 20 minutes earlier, he'd been in a courtroom, a 20-minute trial. The High Court of Justice found him guilty of aiding the enemy, torture, and the deaths of Italian patriots. Koch ran the Bandicoke, a special task force in the Italian Social Republic, notorious for hunting partisans and rounding up Jews for deportation. He worked under SS protection in Rome with his own prisons and torture chambers. Hundreds died. The Social Republic government was so terrified of his methods, they ordered an amnesty for political prisoners not charged with murder because they feared Koch would kill them anyway. Even Benito Mussolini had him arrested in October 1944 for his excesses. During the trial, Koch admitted most charges. He confessed to invading the extraterritorial Basilica of St. Paul, arresting anti-fascist leaders, beating prisoners until ribs broke. 3 or 4 ribs, he said, like ordering coffee. The prosecutor demanded death in the name of an Italy betrayed and martyred but reborn. 3 witnesses testified. Rome's former chief of police Morosini confirmed the accusations. Commissioner Maritoli testified that police investigations proved the atrocities. Film director Luchino Visconti spoke for the defense, but admitted he witnessed Koch's band committing atrocities against Italian patriots. The judges needed no time. Guilty. Death. Fort Bravetta. Koch wore a light tan suit. A priest spoke to him as guards tied him to the death chair. Newsmen and photographers gathered close. No barriers, no distance. The firing squad aimed 17 shots. The officer pronounced him dead. The squad walked away. His body went into a plain box loaded onto a truck. 26 years old. The chair and ropes were burned after. If you value documented wartime justice and collaboration history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the National World War II Museum digital collections published in June 1945, with original Office of War Information photographs, and the Wikipedia entry for Pietro Koch updated June 17, 2025, citing Italian tribunal records. Now back to the information. Oslo, October 24th, 1945, 2:40 in the morning. Akershus Fortress. Vidkun Quisling stands before a Norwegian firing squad, the man whose name became synonymous with traitor in half a dozen languages. He's 48 years old, convicted on charges including treason, murder, and embezzlement. His trial lasted from August 20th to September 10th. 9 judges in Oslo's High Court heard how Quisling encouraged Norwegians to fight in the German military, attempted to recall the government's mobilization order, announced a coup on April 9th, 1940. He met Adolf Hitler twice in December 1939. 4 days after the Nazi invasion, Quisling interrupted a radio broadcast to proclaim himself Prime Minister and order cooperation with invading Germans. The British, American Auschwitz, and Swedish newspapers condemned him immediately. His own party, the National Samling, had garnered only 2% of votes in 1933 and 1936 elections. Norwegians rejected his anti-Semitic views, his extreme right ideology. But Hitler gave him minister-president status in February 1942 under Reichskommissar Josef Terboven. Quisling tried to convert churches, schools, and youth to Nazism. Opposition was fervent. He served as puppet head while Terboven administered brutally, initiating Gestapo spying that led to thousands of arrests and executions of resistance fighters. At trial, Quisling's defense argued he acted as patriot loyal to constitutional government. The prosecution nailed him, linked him to massacres, called out his policies. The jury deliberated. The Norwegian Supreme Court affirmed the verdict, found trial procedures legal, law correctly applied. Capital punishment, rarely used in Norway since 1876, was deemed constitutional. Quisling testified at other national Samling trials. Then, October 24th, 2:40 in the morning. His last words before the shots: "I'm convicted unfairly and I die innocent." His body was cremated. Ashes buried in Fyresdal. His wife Maria lived in Oslo until 1980. They had no children. The term Quisling entered dictionaries as traitor, collaborator, the worst kind, someone who operates a puppet government for occupying forces. 37 Norwegians and 12 Germans were executed in Norway's post-war purge. Quisling was the first, the most hated. Paris, July 23rd, 1945. The trial of Philippe Pétain begins. The 89-year-old Marshal of France, hero of Verdun, now accused of treason. 3 weeks of testimony in a packed courtroom. The man who shook Hitler's hand in October 1940 announced France would collaborate. My policy? He said. My minister's answer to me. I alone will be judged by history. 5 years later, July 1945. His face had been everywhere during occupation. Posters, stamps, calendars, China. Few had seen him in person. The courtroom rose as he entered. Blue eyes, single medal, taking his seat in the room's center. He read a statement. Then mostly silence for 3 weeks. The charges. Heading a conspiracy to destroy France's democratic government, collaborating with Nazi Germany. The prosecution listed concession after concession, capitulation after capitulation. Pétain's April 1944 speech praising Germans, defense of the continent against Bolshevism, warning against Allied so-called liberation. His regime deported 76,000 Jews to extermination camps. 15,000 people stripped of citizenship through the Denaturalization Committee. His government created the milice, the brutal paramilitary police. Prosecutor André Mornay spoke for 5 hours, patiently, stitch by stitch, weaving the net that snared the accused. The defense claimed Pétain sacrificed personal honor to save France, shielded people from full Nazi repression. Witnesses testified to private assurances, but the public record was damning. Pierre Laval, his prime minister, testified he kept Pétain informed. At a July 1942 meeting, Laval called foreign Jews in France garbage waste sent by Germans. The verdict came August 15th. Guilty. Death sentence. But Pétain was 89. Charles de Gaulle commuted to life imprisonment. The old marshal was sent to Fort de Portelet, then transferred to Ile-Dieu. He died there, July 23, 1951, exactly 6 years after his trial began. The deportations he enabled, the laws he signed, the collaboration he championed killed thousands. De Gaulle's only comment on those seeking clemency for writers who supported Vichy. In literature, as in everything, talent confers responsibility. Fresnes prison, October 15, 1945. Morning, Pierre Laval, Vichy France's prime minister, 3 times prime minister of France total, awaits execution. He's 62. The trial lasted from October 4th to October 8th. He was charged with plotting against state security, intelligence with enemy, collaboration. 3 defense lawyers who'd never met him before. The trial was chaos. Laval tried to defend himself, portraying himself as savior of France, claiming collaboration prevented harsher consequences. But the record showed otherwise. He implemented anti-Semitic policies, arranged meetings with Adolf Hitler, pledged cooperation of the French state to Germany, said in 1942, "I wish for the victory of Germany." He organized La Relève, sending French workers to Germany, signed orders sanctioning deportation of foreign Jews to death camps, arranged for thousands to die. Removed from office by Pétain in December 1940, but reinstated in 1942 under German pressure. The verdict, guilty, death by firing squad. Early morning of October 15th, Laval bit down on a cyanide capsule stitched into his jacket lining. A suicide note said he didn't want French soldiers as accomplices in a judicial crime. The poison was old, ineffective. Doctors pumped his stomach. Charles de Gaulle declared Laval would be shot on a stretcher, but French code wouldn't allow it. He had to stand. By 11:30, he regained consciousness. They dressed him, drove him to the execution site. He stood at the stake, no blindfold. The firing squad aimed. He shouted, "Vive la France!" 17 shots. He was 62 years old. His wife said to an English newspaper, "It's not the French way to try a man without letting him speak. That's the German way." His body went to an unmarked grave in Thiais Cemetery. November 1945. They moved him to Montparnasse Cemetery, Chambrun family mausoleum. His name became synonymous with traitor in French language. 767 executions were carried out from French death sentences. Laval's was among the first, the most public. Fort de Châtillon, Paris, October 10th, 1945. Joseph Darnant faces the firing squad. He's 48 years old, World War I hero. 7 citations for bravery. Founded the milice, the Vichy government's paramilitary police force. Over 35,000 members by 1944. the most feared, most hated organization in occupied France, Darnand was far right. Extreme, a true believer. He joined Action Française in 1925, Croix de Feu in 1928, La Cagoule in 1936, secret terrorist group, bombings, assassinations, arms depots across France. When World War II began, Darnand volunteered. Served in the Maginot Line, decorated for bravery. Captured June 1940, but escaped to Nice. He founded Service d'Ordre Légionnaire that supported Pétain and Vichy, offered help against French resistance. January 1st. 1943, he transformed it into the milice. Pierre Laval was official president, but Darnand ran it. August 1943, he took personal oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler, received rank of Sturmführer in Waffen-SS. December 1943, became head of police, later Secretary of Interior. The milice hunted down maquisards, resistance guerrilla fighters, aided German forces in combat. Darnand commanded a milice unit in March 1944 near Lyons that flushed out resistance fighters. His organization set up courts-martial, decreed executions. They were emblem of Vichy's tragic end. After Normandy invasion, Allied advance, Darnand fled to Germany in September 1944, joined Pétain's puppet government in Sigmaringen, promoted to Sturmbannführer November 1st, 1944. April 1945, he fled to Murano in northern Italy. British captured him June 25, 1945, took him back to France. Trial. Found guilty of intelligence with enemy, collaboration, sentenced to death October 3rd. 7 days later, Fort de Châtillon, the firing squad. 48 years old, buried in Batignolles Cemetery in Paris. Over 40,000 members of milice arrested after war, many executed in wild purge immediately following liberation. Darnand's execution was legal purge, state vengeance, public record. Montrouge, military fort outside Paris. February 6th, 1945, dawn. Robert Brasillach stands before a firing squad. He's 35 years old, writer, journalist, editor-in-chief of fascist weekly Je suis partout, novelist, poet, playwright. During occupation, he launched attacks on Republicans, communists, Jews, foreigners. He was France's most envied, most reviled writer. He called for Jews to be deported en bloc, families and little ones, published names and addresses of Jews in hiding, called for death of left-wing politicians. Summer 1944 signed call for a summary execution of all French resistance members. He toured Eastern Front, visited Caton massacre site, visited Legion of French Volunteers against Bolshevism, returned saying he became collaborator of the heart, not just reason. Considered himself moderate anti-Semite. He was member of Group Collaboration encouraging cultural ties between France and Germany. August 1944, liberation of Paris, Brasillach went into hiding. He turned himself in, imprisoned at Frasnes, wrote Poème de Freste while jailed. Trial, January 19th, 1945. Found guilty of intelligence with enemy, treason. Prosecutor Marcel Reboul linked Brasillach's writings to SS massacre of 600 villagers. Accused him of sleeping with enemy. The jury deliberated 25 minutes. Death sentence. Brasillach shouted, "It's an honor." François Mauriac organized petition for clemency. Albert Camus signed. Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir refused. Petition signed by Paul Valéry, Paul Claudel, Jean Cocteau, Colette, Arthur Honegger, Jean Anouilh, Thierry Molnier. Many of France's literary elite. Charles de Gaulle refused clemency. Said, "In literature, as in everything, talent confers responsibility." It was argued de Gaulle refused because Brasillach had called for execution of Georges Mondel on numerous occasions. February 6th, dawn, Horse Montrouge, the firing squad, 35 years old. He was the only French writer of distinction executed for what he wrote. The only collaborationist to remain unpardoned as of 2025. His case raised questions that echo still. Accountability of writers, power of words to harm, possibility of justice during wartime. 4 months of courts of justice condemned 6,763 to death, 1,500 executed. Brasillach was among them. Montrouge, Paris suburb, April 15th, 1947, military fort. Fernand de Brinon stands before the firing squad. He's 61 years old. Marquis, lawyer, journalist, architect of French collaboration. He claimed 5 private talks with Adolf Hitler between 1933 and 1937. First French journalist to interview Hitler, leading member of France-Germany Committee. Circle of the Great Shield, July 1940. Pierre Laval invited him to represent Vichy regime to German high command in occupied Paris. His office, confiscated Hôtel de Breteuil on Avenue Foch. September 1940, he established group collaboration for closer cultural ties between Germany and France. April 1942, Philippe Pétain gave him title Secretary of State, third-ranking member of Vichy regime. His enthusiastic support for fascism was so important to Nazis, they gave his Jewish-born wife, Jean-Louise Rachel Frank, special honorary Aryan pass, exempting her from deportation. She was cousin of Emmanuel Berle, had converted to Catholicism. The Brinons were socialites in 1930s Paris, friends with political elite. When liberation of France began in 1944, Vichy leadership fled. De Brinon was selected president of Rump government in exile at Sigmaringen. Germans wished to project facade of legality. Enlisted de Brinon as president of French government commission. Joseph Darnan, Jean Lucher, others served as members. Allied troops arrested him. He and his wife held in Fresnes prison. She was released. He was tried by French Court of Justice for war crimes. Found guilty. Sentenced to death March 6, 1947. 6 weeks later, April 15th, Montrouge, the firing squad, 61 years old. His memoirs were published posthumously in 1949. His wife Lisette spent occupation safe from deportations he helped arrange for thousands of other Jews. His name exemplifies obsequious collaboration, ideological betrayal exceeding daily adjustments most Vichy officials sought. He represented Nazi end of Vichy spectrum. The Hague. Walsdorpervlakte, May 7, 1946, 6:30 in the morning. Anton Mussert walks to the firing squad. He's 4 days from 52nd birthday. Founder and leader of National Socialistische Beweging, National Socialist Movement in Netherlands, the Dutch NSB. Co-founded. December 14th, 1931 with Cornelis van Gilkerken. Most prominent Dutch collaborator. He admired Benito Mussolini, modeled movement on Italian fascism. 1935, parliamentary elections. NSB received 300,000 votes, almost 8%. 1937, half that. Mussert worked toward preventing resistance to German invasion. May 10, 1940, German troops invaded Netherlands. Mussert suppressed all political parties except NSB. He wasn't appointed prime minister. Austrian Nazi Arthur Seyss-Inquart was appointed Reichskommissar instead. Berlin summoned Mussert to control uncooperative countrymen. He responded by working with Gestapo, stopping resistance. September 1940 instructed formation of Nederlandsche SS as NSB division. February 1941 oversaw formation of 23rd SS Volunteer Panzer, Grenadier Division Nederland. End of 1941, he swore personal loyalty to Hitler. May 1942, entire Dutch SS followed. By end of 1942, NSB influence nearly dissipated. His role as leader of Dutch people became meaningless title without power. He held nominal title Leider van het Nederlandse Volk from 1942 onwards. Leader of Dutch people. Germans called it de Leider. In German that means, unfortunately. During Hunger Winter Famine of 1944-45, German ban on food transport killed 18,000. Mussert stayed silent, fearing loss of what little power remained. 205,901 Dutch men and women died during war. Netherlands had highest per capita death rate of German-occupied countries in Western Europe. 2.36%, May 7, 1945. Germany surrendered. Mussert was arrested same day at NSB office in The Hague. 2-day trial, November 1945. Convicted of high treason, November 28th. Sentenced to death, December 12th. He appealed to Queen Wilhelmina for clemency. She refused. May 7, 1946, exactly 1 year after arrest. Walsdorfervlakte. The site where over 250 Dutch citizens had been executed by Nazis during occupation. 6 in the morning, prison commander collected him from cell. Reverend Brandeje accompanied him. Prison vehicle arrived 6:27. Mussert stepped out, walked to firing squad. 6:30, dead. He was buried in unmarked mass grave. Algemeen Begraafplaats, The Hague, grave number 5/6/22. 1956, his remains were reportedly stolen by far-right former NSB members. Flemish militant order claimed they received remains. Buried them in Belgium. 1 week later, authorities reported thieves stole wrong remains. Mussert's body still in mass grave, later mixed with other remains, buried in charnel grave. What actually happened to his remains remains unknown. The Dutch called their Holocaust experience the Poland of Western Europe. 90% of Dutch Jews died. Worst mortality rate in Western Europe. These 7 men, Koch 26, Quisling 48, Pétain 89, Laval 62, Darnan 48, Brasilac 35, de Brinon 61, Mussert 51. They thought collaboration was survival, strategy, ideology, path to power. They ended tied to stakes, strapped to chairs, facing firing squads while nations watched. The executions weren't hidden, they were advertised, photographed, documented. State-sanctioned revenge dressed as justice. Some trials lasted 20 minutes, others 3 weeks. The outcome was always the same. These weren't the only collaborators. Tens of thousands across Europe faced courts, prisons, execution squads, and wild purges and legal proceedings. But these 7 became symbols. Their names entered dictionaries as synonyms for betrayal, Quisling, Laval. Their faces appeared on wanted posters, newspaper front pages, newsreels shown in liberated cinemas. The spectacle was the point. After years of occupation, deportation, starvation, massacre, nations needed to see justice, needed to watch the men who sold them out pay with blood. The cameras caught it all. Coke's 20-minute trial, Pétain's 3-week circus, Laval's failed suicide, stomach pumped so he could stand for bullets, Brasilac's literary friends begging for mercy while Sartre and Beauvoir said no, Mussert silent through the hunger winter while 18,000 starved, de Brinon protecting his Jewish wife with special papers while deporting thousands of other Jews. These executions said, this is what happens when you choose the wrong side. But time complicates. Historians debate. Pétain's defenders still claim he shielded France from worse. Mussert's apologists argue he tried to protect Dutch autonomy. The arguments grow hollow against the body count, against the deportation records, against the names in mass graves. In 2023, historian Julian Jackson published France on Trial about Pétain's case, calling it historical drama that never ends. In 2000's Alice Kaplan wrote The Collaborator about Brasilac, asking, was he guilty of treason or executed for intellectual crimes? The questions remain. The executions don't change. 7 men, 7 firing squads, 7 public spectacles designed to say, we will not forget, we will not forgive. Your names will mean traitor in every language. The Walsdorfer Vlakte site where Mussert died is now memorial ground. Over 800 people were executed there during occupation. After liberation, collaborators joined the count. Fort de Châtillon, where Darnon died, still stands. Montrouge, where Brasillac and de Brinon fell. Fort Brevetta, where Coke was shot. These places remember. The photographs remain, Office of War Information. Images of Coke tied to his chair, priest blessing him, bloodstained chair burned after. Newsreels of Pétain's trial, cameras following the marshal's entrance. Documentation of Laval's failed suicide, guards holding him steady for execution. The Dutch photographed Mussert's arrest, his time in Scheveningen prison, the morning they drove him to Walsdorfer Vlakte. The legal purges varied by country. France sentenced 6,763 to death, executed 791. Netherlands executed around 40 people through official channels, many more in wild purge. Norway executed 37, mostly members of National Samling. Belgium executed Belgians who collaborated. Italy tried and shot collaborators in weeks after liberation. The numbers don't capture the chaos. The summary executions in streets as Germans retreated. The women with shaved heads paraded through towns. The concentration camps opened and turned into holding pens for collaborators. Fresnes prison, where Laval and de Brinon and Brasillac waited for death. Drancy internment camp managed by resistance until gendarmerie arrived September 15, 1944. The French used their own concentration camps to hold presumed collaborationists. Velodrome Diver. The irony burned. These 7 executions were legal. Trials happened, evidence presented, verdicts reached. But legal doesn't mean neat. Coke's 20-minute trial was mockery. Laval's trial so flawed he refused to attend remainder, wouldn't defend himself. The verdict was foregone conclusion. Brasilac's jury deliberated 25 minutes for a death sentence. Mussert's 2-day trial in November. Execution in May. The waiting. The appeals denied. The letters to queens and presidents and generals asking for mercy. Pétain got mercy. Life imprisonment instead of death because he was 89, because he was hero of Verdun. He died in 1951. The others got bullets. The distinction seems arbitrary until you read the charges, until you count the bodies, until you see the photographs of deportation trains leaving Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, headed to Auschwitz, to Bergen-Belsen, to Sobibor. The collaborators signed orders, organized logistics, provided names and addresses, published propaganda supporting it, called for more. These weren't passive bystanders. These were architects, enforcers, cheerleaders. And when the war turned, when the Allies pushed through Europe, these men tried to run. Darnon fled to Italy. Laval fled to Spain, then Austria. Mussert stayed, but it didn't matter. They were all caught, all tried, most executed. The spectacle served purpose. It said collaboration has consequences. It drew line between those who resisted and those who enabled genocide. It attempted catharsis for nations that had endured occupation, but it also raised questions that won't disappear. Was Brasilac executed for intellectual crimes, for words written, or for actual treason? Did his articles cause deaths, or just reflect ideology? The prosecutor linked his writings to massacres. The defense said he was writer, not soldier. The firing squad didn't care about the distinction. Was Pétain traitor or pragmatist? Did he save France from total occupation or enable deportation of 76,000 Jews? Both can be true. Both were true. History doesn't resolve into simple verdicts despite what courtrooms try to do, but the executions happened. The photographers captured them. The documents survived. The names entered language as warnings. June 5th, 1945. October 15th, 1945. October 24th, 1945. February 6th, 1945. October 10th, 1945. April 15th, 1947. May 7th, 1946. 7 dates, 7 men, 7 firing squads. 7 public spectacles designed to close chapters that will never close. The photographs show the moments. Koch in his light tan suit, Laval standing after the failed suicide. Quisling at Akershus Fortress in darkness at 2:40 in the morning. Pétain silent in the courtroom. Brasilac shouting, "It's an honor." Darnon at Fort de Châtillon, de Brinon at Montrouge. Musser walking to Walsdorfer Vlakte at 6:30 in the morning. These images don't fade. They document moment when collaboration ended not in exile or prison, but in blood. When nations said, "This we cannot forgive. This we must see punished. This we must photograph for history." And they did. The cameras were there. The crowds gathered. The newspapers printed the stories. The newsreels showed the footage. Public executions in 1945, 1946, 1947. Not medieval spectacles. Modern justice with modern technology documenting every moment. The message clear. Betrayal of this magnitude requires public reckoning. In July 1945, a mass grave at Walsdorfer Vlakte was opened. They found the bodies of Dutch resistance fighters executed by Germans during occupation, same site where Mussert would die less than a year later. The symbolism was intentional. The collaborators died where their policies had killed others. Fort de Châtillon, where Darnand was shot, was site where his milice had operated. The locations mattered. The timing mattered. These executions happened in first months and years after liberation, when anger was hottest, when evidence was everywhere, when the smell of death still hung over Europe. Later executions became harder to justify. Later trials took years, decades. Maurice Papon wasn't convicted until 1998 for deportation of 1,600 Jews. Klaus Barbie wasn't tried until 1987. Time creates distance. In 1945, there was no distance. The camps were still warm. The deportees who survived were still coming home. Skeletal, traumatized, bearing witness. The mass graves were being discovered. The full scale was becoming clear. In that moment, executing collaborators felt like justice, felt necessary, felt like the only possible response. Whether it was justice or vengeance or both, history still debates. What isn't debated, it happened. 7 men, 7 bullets, 7 public spectacles that closed the book on collaboration. Except the book won't close. Their names persist. Their executions persist. The photographs persist. The debate persists. Justice, vengeance, or something in between. The firing squads fired regardless. The story did not end in the West. The firing squads in Paris and Rome and Oslo were just one theater of retribution. As the Red Army pushed west, another kind of justice followed, swifter and often more brutal. In the East, collaboration was tangled with decades of ethnic hatred, civil war, and the titanic struggle between Nazism and Stalinism. Here, the collaborators weren't just traitors to a nation. They were often seen as traitors to a cause, to a people, to a revolution. The trials were shorter, the gallows were taller, and the crowds were sometimes larger. The men who helped the Nazis here didn't just sell out their countries. They often led regimes of extermination that rivaled their German masters in ferocity. And when their end came, it was not with the relative dignity of a bullet. It was at the end of a rope. Bratislava, April 15th. 1947. The gallows are ready. Joseph Tiso, the Catholic priest who became president of the Nazi puppet state of Slovakia, is about to die. He is 59 years old. For 6 years, he ruled a state born from the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, a state that paid Germany to deport its own Jewish citizens. The charge is treason. The evidence is overwhelming. Tiso's government passed its own version of the Nuremberg laws. In 1942, his regime agreed to send its Jewish population to German camps in Poland. They paid the Reich 500 Reichsmarks per person for the service. Over 57,000 Slovak Jews were deported under Tiso's watch. He gave a speech in Halich in August 1942 defending the deportations, calling them Christian and necessary because the Jews were parasites. When reports of mass murder filtered back, the deportations paused, but they resumed after the Slovak National Uprising in 1944. At his trial, which lasted from December 1946 to April 1947, Tiso claimed he was a victim of circumstance, a leader trying to protect his people by choosing the lesser of two evils. He argued his actions saved Slovakia from direct German occupation. The prosecution presented the documents, the deportation lists, the laws signed with his own hand. The court found him guilty of treason, collaboration, and crimes against humanity. President Edvard Beneš refused all appeals for clemency, despite a plea from the Vatican. So on April 15th, they lead the priest from his cell. He wears his clerical collar, he is hanged, his body is buried in a secret location to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine. The priest who sold his flock was judged not by God, but by the state he betrayed. His legacy still divides Slovakia. Martyr to some, traitor to most. Budapest, March 12, 1946. 4 men walk to a courtyard gallows. One of them is Ferenc Szalasi. He is 49 years old. For 163 days, he was the leader of the nation. The head of the Hungarian Arrow Cross government installed by the Germans in October 1944 after they overthrew Miklos Horthy. His brief rule was a condensed nightmare of fascist terror. While the Soviet army was at the gates of Budapest, Szalasi's Arrow Cross death squads rampaged through the city. They emptied the Jewish ghetto, marching tens of thousands towards the Austrian border in winter. Thousands more, including women, children, and the elderly, were shot on the banks of the Danube River, their bodies tumbling into the icy water. The final, frenzied phase of the Hungarian Holocaust happened on his watch. He oversaw the murder of as many as 15,000 Hungarian Jews and countless political opponents. When Budapest fell, he fled to Austria. American troops captured him in May 1945. They handed him over to the new Hungarian government. His trial before a people's tribunal in Budapest was a public spectacle. He and 3 of his ministers were tried together. Szalasi was unrepentant, using the stand to deliver long, rambling ideological speeches. He claimed he was fighting Bolshevism to save Europe. The court was unmoved. The verdict for all 4 was death. On March 12, 1946, they are hanged, one after another, in the courtyard of the prison on Marco Street. A large crowd is permitted to watch. News cameras film the entire event. His last words are for Hungary and for the ideology that destroyed it. His execution, and those of hundreds of other Arrow Cross members, was Hungary's brutal public exorcism of its fascist past. Zagreb. June 7th seemed 1945. The war in Europe ended a month ago, but in Yugoslavia, the killing continues. Mile Budak, writer, novelist, and chief ideologue of the Ustaše regime, faces a military court. He is 55 years old. As Minister of Education and Religion in the independent state of Croatia, a Nazi puppet state responsible for the genocide of Serbs, Jews, and Roma, his words were as deadly as any bullet. It was Budak who articulated the Ustaše policy for dealing with the Serbs living in their territory. Kill 1/3, expel 1/3, and forcibly convert 1/3 to Catholicism. He was the intellectual architect of a genocide. His writings and speeches fanned the flames of ethnic hatred that led to the creation of concentration camps like Jasenovac, where hundreds of thousands were brutally murdered. He was no mere bystander. He was a creator of the doctrine of death. After the collapse of the Ustaše regime in May 1945, Budak fled towards Austria with other government officials, attempting to surrender to the British. The British army turned them back, handing them over to Tito's partisans. The process was swift. There was no lengthy trial. No appeal. He was tried for treason and war crimes by a military tribunal in Zagreb. On June 6th, he was sentenced to death. The next day, he was hanged. His execution was part of a massive, often summary, purge of collaborators across Yugoslavia. Thousands were executed without formal trials in the weeks and months after the war. For the partisans, Budak represented the poisonous ideology they had fought for 4 years to destroy. His death was not just justice, it was the symbolic eradication of an idea. Moscow, August 1st, 1946. In the bowels of the Lubyanka prison, 12 men are sentenced to death. Their leader is Andrei Vlasov, once a celebrated Soviet lieutenant general, a hero of the Battle of Moscow. He is 45 years old. His story is one of the most complex and controversial tales of collaboration in the entire war. Captured by the Germans in July 1942, Vlasov, disillusioned with Stalin's regime, agreed to work with his captors. He became the public face of the Russian Liberation Movement and the commander of the Russian Liberation Army, or ROA, composed of Soviet prisoners of war who chose to fight for Germany against Stalin. The Germans never fully trusted him, or his army, deploying them mostly in the West against the Allies. For the Soviets, he was the ultimate traitor, the arch-predatel. He had not just collaborated, he had taken up arms against the motherland. As the Reich collapsed, Vlasov and his men found themselves in a desperate position, hated by the Soviets and distrusted by the Germans. In a final ironic twist, his 1st Division turned against the Germans and helped liberate Prague from the SS, just days before the Red Army arrived. It did not save him. Vlasov surrendered to the Americans, but was forcibly repatriated, handed over to the Soviets. His trial, along with 11 other ROA leaders, was held in secret. There was no jury, no public record. The verdict was decided long before he entered the courtroom. The charge was treason. On August 1st, 1946, the sentence was carried out. Vlasov and his co-defendants were hanged. The Soviet state made sure his end was ignominious and hidden, a warning to any who might dare to turn against it. These 4 men, Tiso, Zalasy, Budak, and Vlasov, represent another side of the reckoning. Their end was not a firing squad at dawn. A soldier's death. It was the gallows, a punishment reserved for common criminals and traitors. Their crimes were not just aiding an enemy. They were active participants in and architects of genocide and mass murder. Zalasy's Arrow Cross, finishing the work of the SS in Budapest. Budak's Ustaše, creating a state built on racial purity and mass graves. Tiso's government paying to have its own citizens murdered. Their collaboration was not a matter of degree or pragmatism. It was an ideological embrace of annihilation. Vlasov's was a different treason, a military betrayal born of ideology and opportunism that the Soviet Union could never forgive. Their trials, especially in the East, were less about justice and more about political consolidation. The new communist governments of Hungary and Yugoslavia used these trials to legitimize their rule, to purge old elites, and to demonstrate their anti-fascist credentials. In Moscow, Vlasov's secret execution was a grim reaffirmation of Stalin's absolute power. These executions were filmed, photographed and reported, just like those in the West. But the images are starker. The public hangings in Budapest's courtyard, the grainy photos from the Eastern Bloc courtrooms. They tell a story of a continent not just healing, but tearing down the old order with a vengeance. From the Danube to the Vltava, the message was the same as in Paris and Oslo. Collaboration ends here, at the end of a rope, in a secret prison, in a public square. The world was watching, and the world was meant to remember.